really, it shouldn't be necessary to open an institute for scientific freedom. It's like having clean water. It should be a human right. But as we all know, we constantly have to fight for scientific freedom and freedom of speech because there are strong forces that try to counteract these rights all the time.
Well, the thing that concerned me initially was that I thought that what was happening was really anti-democratic, in the sense that Peter had been elected by other members of Cochrane who felt that he would behave in a particular way. He continued to behave in that way. So he was doing the sorts of things that he was elected to do. And then he was voted out by a small majority of one. And I thought that that was really undemocratic. I think that there should be ways of getting rid of people who commit serious misconduct, but I don't think that that was an appropriate way, because if you're getting rid of people because they behave in the way they say they're going to behave, or they've behaved in the past, that is contrary to the way democracy works. It would be the way that any political party in government would get rid of all the opposition if they could do that. So I thought that that was wrong for a start. I thought that what Peter had done was not wrong. I thought it was right. He was just bringing to attention things that we were all concerned about. So I didn't think that it was appropriate for Cochrane to get rid of him.
I thought I should have a talk called Heroes of Science, Survival of a Whistleblower. I gave that talk at the Max Planck Institute for Human Development in Berlin this summer. Little did I know that in a few months' time, it would be death of a whistleblower and not survival. I was asked to go to Berlin to explain young people from different sciences, how do you survive for so many years as I have done, speaking truth to power? I told them how, and still didn't know that my time was up. Very soon after that.
I'm also concerned about the way Cochrane goes. I'm concerned about the conflicts of interest. And I've become concerned that a small organization, a grassroots organization set up with good ideals, becomes corporatized, so that it has to make money to survive, and therefore loses some of its original aims, and conflicts of interest creep in so that they become linked more with industry, pharmaceutical companies doing reviews that industry want. And I also am concerned that some of the people who do the reviewing have conflicts of interest that are inappropriate. So I have lots of concerns really about that.
Now, Peter Rost was vice president in Pfizer. He wrote the book, The Whistleblower, Confessions of a Healthcare Hitman. One of the things he wrote was that out of 233 whistleblowers, 90% were fired or demoted, 27% faced lawsuits, psychiatric or physical care, alcohol abuse, lost their homes, 17% got divorced, attempted suicide, 10%. 8% went bankrupt, but only 16% said that they wouldn't blow the whistle again. What mechanism is that? Most people are chicken. What happens in wartime? What happened in Denmark? Most people were chicken. But then there were the freedom fighters, the very few that started a resistance movement. Among them my grandfather and my stepfather. They were both taken by the Gestapo and were both supposed to be killed and were lucky to survive. So there are these few people that are not prepared to accept injustice, but they are very few. So somehow we need to give people confidence. And these whistleblower trials, they take 5 years on average. So you need really to consider carefully whether you want to enter a lawsuit.
Well, whistleblowers in England, there are a number of things that can happen. Industry often will take legal action, sue people for libel or slander. And the problem there is that if you're dealing with a pharmaceutical company, for example, or a medical device company, they have virtually unlimited resources, a pharmaceutical company, a medical device company, and they sue you for libel or slander. They can devote millions of pounds, dollars, euros to suing you, and they can devote a lot of time. In England, for example, and I'm sure in other countries, it can go on for years, libel action. So as an individual, you're spending a lot of your free time fighting the action and spending a lot of money, and they've got enormous resources. And of course, they just employ lawyers to use the time. So that's one problem. The other problem is for people who are whistleblowers in organizations like the NHS. And if you're an employee, what they do is they just find a disciplinary reason to take action against you. They don't say we're taking action against you because you're a whistleblower. They say we're taking action for something else we found, and they sack you. And what they often find is by going through your computer, your rubbish bin, your records, your travel, your hospital notes, the patients you've seen, they find some case they build, and everyone has made minor mistakes, and they use that as an excuse to take action against you. And it's very difficult to defend, because if it's a hospital that's taking industrial action against you, sacked you, and you're fighting an employment tribunal, again, it can go on for several years. But during those several years, you're unemployed, you have no income, and they can spend millions of taxpayers' money on the action against you. And there are a number of trusts that have spent millions of pounds suppressing whistleblowers by finding excuses to take action against them. Well, I first had problems when I was a young research worker in the early 1980s, when I worked on a drug called Amarinone, which I found was, it was hoped that it would help patients with heart failure, but I found it was ineffective and unsafe. And when I reported that to the company, Sterling Winthrop, now part of Sanofi, their initial response was that I should take out some of the data, which would have improved it statistically to give a desired effect. And when I refused that, they offered me the equivalent of 2 years' salary not to publish. And then when I said that I had to publish because patients had volunteered and taken part in the research, they then threatened me with a legal action. But I went ahead and published and found that their drug had horrific, I published the fact that their drug had horrific side effects. I published it in the British Heart Journal, and then was contacted by a doctor from the Netherlands Committee for the Evaluation of Medicines. This was before the European Medicines Agency existed. And he said he didn't understand my data because the side effects I reported were not on my clinical records forms. And I said, well, they are on my clinical records forms. And we compared what had been submitted by the company as my clinical records forms, and they were forgeries. So that was the first concern, or one of the first concerns. And then later on, the company admitted to the Food and Drug Administration in America that the drug was so unsafe that they were withdrawing it worldwide. But 2 years later, I discovered that they were still marketing the drug over the counter in parts of Africa and Asia. So you could just buy it without a prescription, whereas in North America and Europe, it had been withdrawn, so you couldn't even get it on a doctor's prescription. And at that time, we knew it increased mortality by 30%. And I asked Oxfam to help me collect the evidence that it was being sold in Africa and Asia over the counter, which they did. The evidence went to the World Health Organization, and the company were embarrassed into withdrawing the drug worldwide. But I took the story to the major journals, the BMJ, Lancet, Nature. None of them were published because they were all afraid of the expense of being sued by a multinational pharmaceutical company. So I had to go to a national newspaper in the UK, and they looked at the evidence and said there'd be no trouble publishing that. So they published and exposed what had happened. And that was the first experience, but I've had various other experiences since. I've exposed doctors who've committed fraud, research fraud, or embezzled money from charitable research funds. But interestingly, in those cases, institutions have always covered it up. In one case, an institution concealed the fact that a doctor had been falsifying research for a decade. And sorry. And when I tried to expose that, they, when I did expose it, they threatened me with legal action then. And most recently, what happened was I was the principal cardiologist in a trial of a medical device for closing holes in the heart. And essentially, I could not put my name on the paper, nor could one of my colleagues on the steering committee, because the data was false. Side effects from the device were omitted from the paper. The fact that when this device was put in the heart, it sometimes fell out and came loose. So it wasn't actually in the hole, it was lying loose in the atria, or it got carried off in the circulation and had to be retrieved. Also, it was meant to close the holes and it didn't close them very well. So when I tried to get them to publish that, they refused. They went ahead and published without me or the other doctor, Dr. Nightingale, as authors. They instructed their lawyers to sue us both for libel. They sued me. They didn't sue Dr. Nightingale, but I think that was because he was ill at the time, so they didn't. Their lawyers advised them not to sue a doctor who was actually ill at the time. And they sued me. That went on for 4 years until they went into liquidation because their drug did not work. Their device did not work, and people realized it didn't work. And the doctor who was the first author on the paper, in fact, was later found to have falsified research by the General Medical Council, our body that regulates doctors and provides them with a license, and he was suspended from the medical register for dishonesty in the trial. So, and what's more, it was very interesting because he had already been found to have falsified research in unrelated research some years earlier by our General Medical Council. But I did not know about that at the time that he was recruited to the trial. But the company that recruited him did know. So they were prepared to recruit someone they knew to have a record of misconduct.
I have calculated, based on several independent studies, that our drugs are the third leading cause of death after heart disease and cancer. And yet nobody does anything. That's life. The third leading cause of death are our prescription drugs. And most of these people who died didn't even need the drugs that killed them. It's such a tragedy.
These days, if you want to do trials of drugs or medical devices, the ideal thing is to do a randomized controlled trial. So patients are split into two groups in a random way, and in such large numbers that the two groups are very similar to each other, similar in gender, age, and so on, age distribution, and half get one treatment, and the other half get the best available treatment, if there is an available treatment, or if not, a placebo, but the best available treatment otherwise. And then you randomize people and you see which groups do best using predefined endpoints, not endpoints that are decided afterwards. And that is one shortcoming, because often in trials, industry trials, they change the endpoints to fit what they've found, so to speak. But it has to be predefined endpoints based on looking at previous trials, observations, and theoretical reasons for thinking that this trial or this drug or this device would work. So you've got a predefined way of looking at what the answers are. There are lots of ways of manipulating the trials to give you the result you want. One way is to actually use a placebo when there is an effective treatment, so you're not comparing it really with the best available treatment. So that's one thing. The second thing is you use the best available treatment, but at the wrong dose. So you give either too low a dose so that the best available treatment is not at the right dose, or it's too high a dose and has a high side effect profile. Or you just look and analyze at the end and see in which ways your data looks better, and then that becomes your endpoint. So there are lots of ways for industry to manipulate it, but in some cases there is frank falsification, and that, I think, is far more common than we like to admit. I think that there's quite a lot of frank falsification, and that's what I've experienced every time I've worked with industry, to be honest. If there are trial results you don't like, then of course you don't publish them. That is one thing. That's, if you find that your product is not as good as a competitor's and you can't fiddle the data to make it look better, then the best thing is not to publish at all. And that happens. So, and often investigators are very willing to go along with this. There are examples where senior people have put their names as authors of papers they had nothing to do with, and that gives kudos to the trial. If you take a very senior person, and I can think of examples where as much as £4 million has been paid for people to be the first author of research because they were very eminent, when they had nothing whatsoever to do with the research. And of course, if they've got a very well-known author as first author, then they're likely to get into the best journals because people think that then it must be good quality research because they're such a well-known author.
Our whole system is broken. We can't trust what gets published, and there are conflicts of interest everywhere. Selective publication of data, so we need to work against that.
There are lots of people who are very eminent in my field, in cardiology, and of course when they just give an opinion, that counts for rather more than some of the trials in some cases. And in fact, many of these people are, in my experience, just guns for hire, so to speak. They will do whatever industry wants them to do or say. But it is very worrying because their opinions count for a lot, particularly with other colleagues, and sometimes with patients and with licensing authorities, regulators, FDA or EMA. I think their opinions count. And my experience is that often on these bodies, or certainly I've been on a committee looking at a drug and its use for the MHRA, Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency in the UK. And people who were on it were supposed to declare their conflicts of interest, other doctors. And after it was all over, we discovered that 4 of the committee making recommendations about the drug for this treatment were conflicted. And according to the criteria we were given before the first meeting and before each of the subsequent meetings, and was read out at the start of each meeting, they should not have been on the committee. So we had 4 people who were told 7 times what the conflicts of interest were and forgot to disclose theirs. And these were making decisions about a drug that's commonly used in the UK. And I find that very worrying. And these people don't see it as a problem. They feel it's almost their right to be there.
We already know that it's bad. So how much more confirmatory research do we need to say, yes, the car is broken? We already know it can't run. So let's build another car and perhaps do less of this kind of research. But sometimes it's necessary to open people's eyes still. The drug industry typically says, oh yes, but that was in the past. It has become much better. It never has. It becomes worse.